Hi, Sanjay.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good.
Good. Right.
So we'll just start in about another 5 to 7 minutes. Wait for the audience to join and Osama as well. Osama as well. Osama, if you've joined us, you could then unmute yourself and start your video. We just wanted to check if there's if that's happening okay. Good morning, Osama.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Osama. Good morning. Krishna here from Satwa.
Hi, Krishna. How are you?
I'm good, sir. So we'll keep this. Thanks so much to all four of you for joining. We already have Sanjay, Dhara, and Richa on the call. We will keep this fairly, free flowing. Saloni had already sent some indicative questions, so we'll pretty much, build on that. And if you have to trigger any specific points in the discussion, you can always use the private channel to send me a ping, and I'll bring that in, or I'll bring you in at that point as well.
Okay.
We'll wait for another 5 minutes for the audience to join. We've broadcasted the session.
How are you broadcasting?
So this is being broadcasted via YouTube as well as we go live.
Okay.
Plus on Zoom, plus on the app, and as well as on YouTube.
So this is half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour.
2 hours, 2 hours, 11:55, 10 to 12.
We are going to talk 2 hours. Wow.
We'll speak for about 45 minutes to 50 minutes initially, and then we'll open up more for Q&A, and there's a poll in the end.
Yes.
Prime Minister will be very unhappy. He talked only 33 minutes.
From PM is now called the 8 PM apparently.
Yeah.
Nikita, will you give us a cue on when we could start, when the audience have joined?
So the session is supposed to start at 10:05. We can just wait for 3 more minutes and start.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Nikita. Just give us a cue.
Sure. Sure.
If any of you want to toggle with your views, you could also do that, just in case you want just the speaker view, or we've enabled the side speaker and the presentation view so that you're able to see all the other panelists and the moderator simultaneously. But if any of you want to change and customize the view.
So, Shrikant, this is going to be discussion oriented, right? It is not going to be like speech and then one after the other.
So no, this is mostly we will, open up with a few questions. I'll set the context with a couple of slides, and then I will bring each of you in with one or two leading questions that I want you to address, and then you respond to that. And then, through that, we will probably also kind of open up for more questions. And if any of you want to ask questions to each other, then, we'll open up for that as well. Feel free to kind of add, or, we can move between points of different speakers as well. We'll do that discussion, maybe 2 rounds of that for about 45 minutes. And then we'll open up for Q&A with the audiences, which Saloni will help us moderate. She will send me the questions and I will keep redirecting it to you all. And then in the end, we will summarize with 1 or 2 recommendations from you to the rest of the ecosystem, post which we will do a small poll.
Cool.
It's a live poll, so we'll have results.
Yeah, good.
Great. Should we start? Nikita, can we begin?
We can start the session.
Great. Good morning to all the panelists and audience. Thank you so much for making it time today and attending the session with us today. My name is Saloni and I represent Sattva. Sattva is hosting the financial inclusion theme at Charcha this year. And this session today is the second of the 5 sessions that we are hosting. To talk a little bit today, the session is on accelerating innovations and pathways on digital inclusive finance, a very relevant and absolutely important theme in today's context in the post-COVID scenario. To tell you a little bit about Sattva, we at Sattva are driven by the mission to end poverty in our lifetime, and our work focuses on scalable solutions for sustainable and impact. And in this endeavor, we work with corporations, corporates, foundations, social organizations, governments, and multilateral agencies. To tell you about the session flow for today, we will first start with an introduction to the panelists, and then followed by context setting and a panel discussion where we will open it to the panel with a few questions that we have on possible solutions that can be taken to addressing inclusive digital finance. We will then have a Q&A session with the audience. I would request the audience gathered here to drop your questions in the Q&A panel, which is given in the bottom corner of your screens. We will take it up with the relevant panelists during this course. And before we close the session, we will also have an interesting poll where some of the solutions will be discussed and will be thrown open, and your opinion will be actually broadcasted live. To join the poll, we would request you to log in to www.menti.com, and you can use the code 10281. My colleagues will also put it on the chat window for you to easily log into the poll. The poll will be conducted towards the end of the session. I'd now like to introduce our moderator for the session today. Our moderator for the session today is Mr. Sri Krishna Sridhar Murthy, fondly called as Krishna. Krishna is actually the co-founder and CEO in Sattva, and he's also been associated with multiple social organizations in an advisory capacity. Over to you, Krishna.
Thank you so much, Saloni, and welcome to all the panelists here. I would like to just briefly introduce each of the panelists, starting with Richa. Richa, welcome, warm welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. And Richa, she leads the CSR and sustainability at L&T Finance, many years in the CSR and the development space, with a strong focus on how to bring business and the social impact space together. and we've had a wonderful relationship with Richa and her team, in bringing together the flagship of L&T Finance around Digital Saki, which we hope we all can learn from Richa today. So warm welcome, Richa. Dhara, coming from the Suryodaya Small Finance Bank, she's a senior vice president there. Many years in the banking ecosystem, heads strategic initiatives and partnerships at the Suryodaya Small Finance Bank, and is also on the board of the foundation of Suryodaya and looks after CSR. And I think very important to have the view of how small finance banks are looking at financial inclusion and especially enabling it through the digital medium. So, Dhara, look forward to hearing your thoughts today as well. Very warm welcome to Sanjay. Sanjay has been in this ecosystem of technology and society for a while now, starting with his stint in UIDAI, previously obviously with the corporate ecosystem. He's right now the partner at Bharat Innovation Fund and also the Chief Innovation Officer at CIE. And he's somebody we hope will bring in both the digital technology and the ecosystem angle to the conversation. So Sanjay, warm welcome again. And Osama Manzar from Digital Empowerment Foundation. I think everybody knows Osama in some capacity or the other. So wonderful, Osama, to have you here. And it's great to see and learn from you on, especially on adoption and how do we actually get it done at a grassroots, a larger scale, and what ecosystem we would need to be able to kind of do this empowerment at a mass level. And that's really where we would love to hear Osama's views as well. So what I will do is just set the context a little bit and open up for more discussion this year. I think to just start the discussion, I think we moved very quickly in this during post COVID-19 kind of a situation, from what was an aspirational mission of becoming more digital to now it's almost like a mandatory mission. I think all of us working in this model to the rest of the ecosystem going digital so quickly in the last 4 or 5 weeks. It's literally become a mandatory need for many people in the ecosystem, and at the bottom of the pyramid, it becomes an even more important tool to kind of enable if we were to deliver at that level. Despite having the Jan Dhan, the Aadhaar, and the mobile trinity, we still see significant challenges from a digital financial inclusion point of view. Some of the numbers are just indicated here in terms of our penetration and access, and also how much of rural India is able to kind of get access to some of the financial inclusion tools and content out there, and how that is actually being enabled on the ground, which is really impacting lives and livelihoods. I think that's really where though we have made progress in some areas, we still, I think, are not able to meet that final outcome that we really want. And the idea today is to see what more can we do and how can we accelerate, given that this is almost now a necessity. There's also a lot of behavioral change that needs to happen. That such heavy reliance of cash, and some years ago, I've even still seen small parts of barter system even existing in the rural ecosystem. Where you're still exchanging goods. So how do we move away from that to then looking at infrastructure and also the right products? Are we creating the right products and the right kind of tools that are in line with the expectation of this ecosystem? Even in the impact space, still we are quite notorious for thinking about the mid to the top of the pyramid and then trying to kind of drill it down to the bottom of the pyramid, which may or may not work in all situations. So there is clearly a need to bring different parts of these ecosystems together, and the ability to accelerate has become the most important conversation now. It's no more whether they should happen, it's how fast they should happen. And I think working together as an ecosystem, as a set of partners, is really the most effective way of getting that done. And that's really what we wanted to kind of talk about here and see how all of us can, in some sense, enable that. So just now, bringing on some of our panelists into discussion to talk about the key, points across access, product innovation, infrastructure linkages, and ecosystem. So these clearly are four specific things that we want to talk about. And I'll probably start off with, Richa, you coming in and telling us a little bit about the initiative of, the Digital Sakhi that you all run at L&T Finance, and you've had a very strong focus on enabling this digitally. So you didn't only approach it from a financial inclusion point of view, you added the digital piece right at the beginning, and you've taken a very strong focus on women as one of the segments that are probably underpenetrated in this whole ecosystem. So it would be great to understand how the model of Digital Sakhi has evolved. What are some of the key learnings, and where do you think using those learnings the rest of the ecosystem can go, and what your vision is as well going forward?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Krishna, and warm welcome to everybody. It's my pleasure to take you through the Digital Sakhi model and how we all started with it. As you rightly suggested, Krishna, in a highly patriarchal system that we have in India, while doing baseline surveys across our geographies, we noticed that the asset ownership had been with the men, right from land to, to entire economic, the wages, all men had it, economic control was in the hands of men. And that included digital assets also. So one thing which is for sure is if you're looking at, empowerment of communities, it is important that we bring in women as a force, and it is important for a woman to own these assets. And therefore, to look at the overall, change in the power equations so that she can come out, we ensured that the technology is an enabler, and a rural woman whom we call a Digital Sakhi was selected. Now, she is a woman between the age group of 25 to 45 years of age, and she is given a tablet. Within the tablet, another asset which we feel is the knowledge. So the entire tablet has a digital financial literacy module, which has been developed in-house, and she's trained on that module. Her role is to go door to door and explain various modes of payments, including digital financial literacy and basics of financial literacy. And the third thing which we ensured is to look at entitlement also. Now that again came from a community, interaction, because as we were interacting, we understood that it's okay to, kind of ensure financial literacy and more specific digital financial literacy as the smartphone users are increasing. But, are they really having money in their account? Because that's in majority of our geographies, which we saw, especially in Odisha and MP, which are the remote regions, there's no point doing digital financial literacy if money is not there in the account of people. And therefore, we started stressing on entitlement training also. So what is entitlement training? Entitlement training is basically looking at various government schemes that involve DBT and ensuring that community knows about it. So a Digital Sakhi role is also to talk about these various schemes, including the ones that have been recently announced in COVID era. So her role would be to understand, first of all, what those schemes are, and ensuring that community understands as well as able to adopt it and avail benefit of it. So the idea is that this lady whom we call Digital Sakhi, she becomes a role model, and she's already become in Maharashtra and in MP, which are about 3.5, 4 years of project. Because she has a technology which is tablet. She has the knowledge on financial literacy, digital financial literacy, and schemes of the government. And she's already knowing people. So she is a lady who's inside of their villages. People know about, there's a great rapport with her. One of the selection criteria besides the age is also a great communication skills that she has. So overall, what has happened in the Digital Sakhi program is not only, her empowerment has happened, the Digital Sakhi's empowerment. There's a lady who was just sitting at home, not doing anything, was provided with a technology asset and knowledge. So her empowerment has happened. And through her, various knowledge sessions and awareness sessions have been conducted in community, and they've been able to understand these, and adoption has also happened. Now, a couple of challenges, Krishna, you mentioned in your slide also is with regards to the internet connectivity. As I mentioned, in places like Odisha and MP, the villages that we work in, there are internet challenges, and therefore the digital modes of payment have remained limited. Some of the modes of payment which have been useful are Aadhaar-enabled payment system, because that's biometric driven, so that has worked, and debit card. Usage of UPI has been a challenge, although in the urban areas, the villages which are peri-urban, the usage of UPI and mobile wallets is extremely high. But in the villages, it is a challenge. And therefore, just to touch upon the collaboration that you were talking about in the first slide, potentially, we feel that a corporate partnership where financial services and possibly, the internet provider, telecom service would play a role, because bandwidth connection is a challenge, and therefore people are not able to use it. Even though they know the knowledge, if the infrastructure is not in place, it becomes really a challenge to kind of look at ensuring adoption. While I understand, just recently I was going through the report in April 2020, Aadhaar-enabled payment system has actually gone really up, despite other modes which have gone down. I think NPCI report was stating, and that's because the government schemes which have been announced in the COVID relief, people are actually wanting to know about it, and they're actually withdrawing money out of it, whatever money has been transferred. So given that, I think Digital Sakhi model has been successful because of these three things. One is technology asset that she herself owns, and through that, her empowerment has happened. There's a knowledge which is with her, and knowledge of various kinds, including financial literacy and of the entitlement schemes that have been existing. Now, the second leg, Krishna, I want to touch upon is, besides Digital Sakhi herself, the second component is with regards to women entrepreneurs. These are rural women entrepreneurs whom we also train on various trades which are agri and agri-allied. Now, typically these include dairy, goatry, stitching also, tailoring also. And what we do is, as part of, again, increasing asset ownership, is we upskill them into these technical trades as well as enterprise development program training also. So how should she scale up her business? What is basically profit and loss statements? So these knowledge levels are also increased, and then we support them in certain inputs also, which helps them in scaling up their business. So it's a combined power of, again, an economic empowerment along with technology and along with knowledge, which has actually led to success of the Digital Sakhi program.
Can I quickly ask a question? How many digital Sakhis are there?
Yeah, so Osama, we started with 100 Sakhis in Maharashtra. We've scaled up to 650 Sakhis, reaching out to about 650,000 population. One Sakhi is given a target to reach to about 1,000 community members, going door to door, explaining digital financial literacy, which is provided in her tablet, as well as the entitlement schemes. Besides that, as you know, digital Sakhis are also doing various Digidhan. I mean, they were doing before the COVID era, Digidhan camps, which are in partnership with banks. Again, to add collaboration, banks have this priority to do financial literacy programs, and we tied up with banks through our Digital Sakhi program, so that, various modes of payment, including additional modes of payment, can be explained to the community. So Digidhan camps, one camp attracts about 150 to about even 500 community members. In that camp, Sakhi also explains about various entitlement schemes and government schemes along with the bank officers. So that's again the role of Digital Sakhi.
And they are paid?
Yes. So again, to handhold a rural woman, till the time she's empowered, about 3.5 to 4 years of when we have a project duration period, we pay them an honorarium. Each Sakhi, 650 digital Sakhis are being paid an honorarium on a regular basis. Another thing which we are looking from a sustainability point of view, which I would like to add, is establishment of Digital Sakhi Kendras, where we are looking at, when she's doing payments for the community, she's able to charge an extra amount also. All this was actually happening before the COVID era, and now we will probably have to look at, tweaking our operating model of Digital Sakhi also, given that the touch points may not be there. So camps and all feasibility, at least in this year, we do not see happening. But yeah, I mean, we'll have to look at that aspect also.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thanks, Richa. I think the some of the points that you mentioned are very interesting. Of the asset Hi, can you all hear me?
It's a little muffled. I
Yeah,
think now it's
yeah.
better.
So I was just, Richa, kind of saying the digital asset ownership part is a very important point that you bring up, and also how the sustainability of this initiative, has been something that we, have looked at, and how that's also kind of been customized to different locations, because the story has not been the same across different states, which clearly has been the learning, because even at an execution level. So if you can maybe share a little bit about how that replication has happened, because you started in one state and now you quickly have moved on to multiple states, and also a little bit talk about what will it take to accelerate this model, right, at your end. That will be useful inputs to have.
Yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned, we started first in Maharashtra about 3.5 to 4 years back, and with 100 Sakhis reaching out to about 1 lakh of people. We started with the basics of financial literacy, developed the module, then added a partnership. We got into partnership with National Payment Corporation of India, because their mandate is to kind of look at digital financial literacy, and that has they are our knowledge partner in terms of developing the module, and also sharing information on various latest modes of payment, as well as the do's and don'ts about it. As you know, UPI, there have been various controversies on using UPI also, so they bring in that clarification. So we started with Maharashtra. The model worked well. A similar model was introduced about a year later in MP, in the Dhar and Badwani region. And then we went on to parallelly start Odisha and Tamil Nadu. Now, the variation is, so there's tremendous variation. Like Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, the adoption has been highest in the community with regards to digital modes of payment. But MP, both Dhar and Badwani and Odisha, Baud and Balangi region, which are closer to Chhattisgarh, actually, we first started with entitlement training, which is ensuring that the cash should be in the hands of people. So that is the critical, that is the most important leg in Digital Sakhi running in Odisha and MP, followed by women entrepreneurship training, because that again is ensuring that the income is enhanced. So there's upskilling of the agri-allied trade as well as the EDP training, followed by basics of financial literacy, and then later on we will now start digital financial literacy in the region. So what is essential is when we conduct a baseline survey, and I think Krishna, you know about it because Satwa has been helping us in doing that. Baseline survey findings are extremely critical. These methodologies, they help us understand what really is the knowledge level existing in the communities, what is actually the socioeconomic profile in the community, and what intervention within the digital Sakhi, the 3 legs that we have, we should start first, whether it is entitlement training or digital financial literacy or a livelihood component. So we tweak as we go into geographies, we keep tweaking the model. Now this year we also started with West Bengal. When we did the baseline surveys there, we saw that basics of financial literacy can be initiated, and also digital modes of payment, followed by would be entitlement training. So, again, basics of financial literacy has been initiated. Now this year we will be looking at a digital financial literacy. Again, the villages that we take are typically, where we have business presence. So that again, something which I want to ensure, one of the CSR imperatives that we have taken as a financial services, wherever we have presence of our microfinance business, we will do digital financial literacy or a CSR or digital Sakhi program there only. Now, why you'll ask me, why is that? Now, typically, if you see CSR in a manufacturing setup, they have their plants, they have their manufacturing sites. So they do CSR programs around that. Obviously, I'm not talking about foundations and all, which can do it at a pan-India level, regardless of the geographies. But since we don't have a trust or a foundation, we have taken an approach that we will do it in areas where we have a large number of customer presence, so that we can also look at taking a goodwill advantage out of that. So we do it in those areas. So the geographies are taken from our microloans department. We also take their support in terms of looking at various trades to whom we actually lend. These women entrepreneurs, there are certain trades to which microloans, lend to. I'm sure, Dhara can also, have the same reasoning. So these trades, like I was mentioning, agri-allied trades, dairy, poultry, and also. But what we do is, as part of our CSR, is look at larger community, these women entrepreneurs, whom we can do upskilling in these trades, and then therefore expand their business and increase their credit taking ability. So there is a business alignment and business adjacency also to this digital Sakhi program, and therefore that has ensured this top management's buy-in, which I want to ensure that I want to explain that aspect also. Krishna, if you can just allow me for 1 minute. That when we start CSR models or any program that we're looking at, if you are looking at really the top management's mindshare to come in, it is important to include your business expertise like we did in starting a financial literacy program, and then ensure that it is closer to your business presence. So adjacency is there and there's an alignment to it. So keeping these three factors, this has been a backbone of the Digital Sakhi program. Now, in terms of looking at, scaling up further as as an organization, we can only do so much. You have 650 Sakhis, 650,000 people, 5,500 women entrepreneurs at this particular level. This has been a successful model. A lot of, organizations have been approaching us. So we would like to get into collaboration, as Krishna, with various corporates. Like I mentioned, telecom could be one player that can help us in looking at bandwidth connectivity in areas, in rural areas where net connectivity is not there. We are already in partnership with NPCI. So that's, of course, the government coming in. We are in partnership with certain banks, even rural cooperative banks, when we conduct financial literacy programs. We would like to see, corporates who are working on agri-allied trades also. We've been, thinking of corporates like Godrej Agrovet, where the main focus is looking at upskilling in agri-allied trades and all. So that actually, is something we can look at. Or possibly, an Usha Silai Kendra, they've been running successful Silai Kendra. So Usha would fit into. So I'm just giving you some examples, what kind of corporates. So when you have such collaboration, you can look at a scale. Our expertise will lie on financial literacy, digital financial literacy, all these aspects. But if you want a scale and also looking at adding other expertise with regards specifically with women entrepreneurs, we look at certain corporates to join hands. At the same time, I would also say that certain, livelihood missions, like I know in Odisha government is very active. The state rural livelihood mission is extremely active. So some of our, our implementing partners are also suggesting that if we want to really touch upon, and take Digital Sakhi at a depth level further, we should look at tying up with them as well. So we are now in the exploration stage, Krishna. It's all in deliberation stage. As of now, no calls have been taken, but we are looking at, as we scale up and sustain this particular program, that more and more companies, government, they join hands in this particular scaling up. Yeah.
Absolutely. Richa, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure there are many people who are listening who have now ideas on what can be done with a model like this and how potentially they could, partner as well. And we will come back to you with more questions. Dara, this is probably a good time to bring you in, from talking about access to finance, part of it. Like Richa, I think one of the points she said is about we need monies in the bank accounts as well. And obviously it's a combination of access to finance, livelihood kind of a thing. And as a small finance bank, we do believe you are a lot more closer to the ground than any of the bigger banks. So you have a lot more idea about the grassroots. And you also seem to wear two hats. You're on the business side and also the director of the foundation. So it'll be wonderful to hear your views about, how both at the foundation and at the bank, you all are looking at this problem. And given that digital is almost becoming mandatory now, what are the things that you would like to share, from your perspective and some observations or learnings that you've had?
Sure. So, see, where, the 10 of the banks who got the license, the in-principle license in 2015, 7 of them, were microfinance institutions, and, they were into the model that we all know as the joint liability group model, right? So this is essentially small tickets of loan, which are given to women who belong to low-income households, and they come and borrow as a group, and they also come as a group to repay their loans. So, either every fortnight or monthly, the entire group meets, the loan officer goes, visits them, and the payments are collected. In this particular model, typically any branch caters to a radius of about 20 to 25 kilometers. So from the branch, the customers could be as far as, say based 20 to 25 kilometers away. We launched our banking operations in 2017. And till such time, we were a mono product company. So the only product that we had was JLG. The only audience that we had were women. And in terms of the predictability of the model or the process, the women were used to absolutely being serviced at doorstep. So, even when the loans happen, the loan officer goes, reaches out, the group is formed, the disbursements happen. And month on month, he's visiting them, at their doorstep and picking up the loan repayments, which are in form of cash. So post we launched our banking operations, one of the first things that we wanted to look at was, savings habit for microfinance customers. We did not really go about opening their savings account, for we felt that there will have to be reinforcements and, small nudges and the entire process to be such that, they understand how it is to be done. So what we initially sort of launched was this product called JLG-RD. So essentially it's a recurring deposit. And, whenever the loan officer goes, the customers, apart from availing the loan, could also enroll for the recurring deposit. And we kept the amount flexible. So somebody could, even start a recurring deposit for 100, and in any month that, she's had a good business, she could probably also bump up the amount to, say, 300 or 500. So, we kept it very flexible. We also realized that, we necessarily had to kind of offer doorstep here as well, because a customer who's situated, say 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers away from the branch, for depositing 200 rupees is not going to really make that effort to walk to the branch, and deposit money. Now, for most of our women borrowers, time is money. So an hour and a half away from their work, it tantamounts to, loss in their income. And, the entire concept would therefore be counterproductive. So we sort of overlaid this entire process of recurring deposits over the existing process of, the JLG. So every time that the loan officer goes, he also kind of, goes to the center, encourages them to, save, and, picks up whatever they kind of, have saved. We also removed all the penalties, etc., from the product, because the idea was to kind of really, show them that, if you do it consistently, it's possible to save. We introduced small celebrations. The first round that we did, we kept it small. So we wanted them to do it for 6 months, and members who sort of successfully completed it, we sort of would facilitate them, give them a certificate. So it sort of created that excitement, and, sort of post 6 months, there were more members who were wanting to save, and there were more amounts which were getting saved. This is something that, that's been exciting. Now, with the current situation, we do feel that the need to save, will go up. In our assessment, as of now, we did find that, households had about 2 to 3 weeks of cash available. And now they already know that there's this event, and, there's so much of uncertainty around it. On the other side, government is releasing DBTs. So, people need the bank account. People who so far have not opened bank accounts will also necessarily come and open the bank accounts. The money is going to flow in digitally. And we do feel that, with the current situation, as and when they have access to money, whether through DBTs or on revival of their livelihoods, people are likely to kind of at least save cash and in their bank accounts for 2 to 3 months. So, that's something that we strongly think, would happen. And therefore, we'll have to kind of make sure that, the entire process of onboarding the customers, opening their accounts, will kind of have to be streamlined. In terms of, so also the fact that, from just a single audience, which is the women borrowers, another thing that we felt, was important was to look at a household. and essentially how do we build financial resilience, at a household level. Now, necessarily when it comes to product innovation, it is not that, one has to really reinvent the wheel. And when we talk about the product, it's not really the technical product, which is say a savings or insurance. The product is so much about, how you communicate and, how a customer really derives a value out of that product. Now, two of the government schemes that we have around insurance, which is the Jeevan Jyoti and, the Bima Suraksha, we have decided that, we will cover all the earning members of the household under, these two schemes. Now, if you look at from an institution level, from a pure product economics, it doesn't work. And over and above that, we've also invested in information services. Say for example, if something happens to somebody, then they ought to know, what is to be done, how are the documents to be processed, so that, the claims, etc., are simpler, easier to administer, and, they get money in time. So whereas it may not, from a pure product economics, make sense, but, when you look at the value for the customer, the benefits are disproportionately high. So, just imagine a household, where they've lost an earning member. A 2 lakh rupee coming in, will help them tide over that situation. They'll be able to clear their debts. They'll be able to revive livelihoods. And therefore, the benefit is just not for us, but probably for other financial institutions also from where the customer has borrowed. But it's so much, there's just so much of education for the customer that's really involved, when you kind of want to enroll them for these schemes. Now, one of the things that we also feel, at least in recent past, that has been a huge problem are the perils around the environment. In our 3 years of operations as a bank, we witnessed a Gaja cyclone. We witnessed a Fani in Orissa, and we witnessed, the Kolhapur flooding, that was like last monsoons. When such things happen, there is chaos, there is despair, people lose their belongings, and, again, it becomes a situation when they're not able to sort of repay their loans. Not with one player, but with everyone, because, everything comes to a standstill and their livelihoods are impacted. We did work with a private insurer and, came up with a very affordable content insurance. So, our loan cycles are typically 2 years. And when somebody kind of comes for a loan, they can buy this insurance, which is for 50 rupees. And in event of anything like this happening, and it also covers things like, fire, burglary. There is, surveyor comes and they can get up to 50,000. So, we thought about this product after, the Gaja cyclone. And by the time we sort of, could talk to the insurance company and get it rolled out, that was early last year. And we did have a few of our members who were already enrolled for this in the Kolhapur Belgaum belt. I mean, it was just amazing to see that how easy was this process. And, it just kind of brought in so much of comfort, to these households. Specific to the situation that we are in now, what typically happens is that, when we kind of send something, which kind of would disrupt livelihoods and all, the disbursements typically slow down. Richa would also kind of agree with me that, I mean, there is either they're slowed down or there's a complete stop. Now, during this process, what we also felt was that, the livelihoods are impacted. And people aren't really looking for large amounts of money, but they do want a little bit of money that, that's kind of good enough to see them through for 2-3 months. one of the drawbacks of the JLG model is also that, you know, the customer ends up taking a loan when he or she, she really does not need it. So if a group is borrowing and if you're a member of the group, and if you don't need money at that point in time, you would still take it. We've been really kind of thinking about this, and we've been also kind of wanting to launch this product. But I think when we were faced with this situation, you know, we really rolled up our sleeves, and I think this product was kind of launched in like 4 or 5 days flat. So this is a clean overdraft. We've started with small limits. The benefit for the customer is that they can use whatever they want. And it's also more affordable for them because they only pay interest for the number of days or the amount that they've utilized, you know, the overdraft. So, you know, these are some of the products that we've been working on. And, you know, we also see a lot of value in strengthening these products, you know, going forward.
Absolutely, Dhara, and thank you so much for sharing that. What is very nice to hear is about how customized your products are, you know, to the needs of different situations and different communities, and how it's evolved as well. Just one very quick follow-on question before I bring you know, Sanjay in terms of your at the bank, how much of all the transactions or anything is digital? I mean, is that the direction that you've started to take? How is the digital angle playing out, you know, from the bank's perspective?
So, you know, when we talk about, and I would specifically talk about, you know, our microfinance business, because as a bank, we also now kind of do affordable housing and, you know, commercial vehicles, but these are completely different segments. Microfinance still continues to remain our, you know, largest business. So, you know, about 75% of our loan book consists of, you know, microfinance business. Now, you know, when we talk about digital transactions, the entire disbursement, 100% is digital. So, you know, when we give the loan, the monies get credited in the bank account. When it comes to collections, which is customers paying their EMIs, this before COVID was 100% cash. So the loan officer goes to the center, members bring in money, he counts the money, he posts the entries, he issues the receipts, and he comes back. And then, of course, you know, there are larger processes around how do you bury so much of cash that you've collected, right? Now, when COVID happened, we already had solutions for the other set of businesses. So we do have, you know, small business loans and affordable housing, and most of the repayments happen through NACH. Where NACH bounces, we actually send them a Razorpay link. Customers can, you know, therefore pay. So when this situation happened, one thing that we realized was that we really had to reach out to our customer, because for this segment, if the connect is not there, you know, the repayments wouldn't come in. So we started calling up the customers. We got feedback that, you know, some of them had cash and they wanted to make the payments. You know, we kind of experimented, and you know, today we are about 3% of our base, you know, as of now, has paid through Razorpay. So these are completely digital payments. What is more surprising is that 50% of this are on debit plus PIN, and 50% of them are on UPI. So debit plus PIN was quite expected because people have Jan Dhan accounts and they've been using, you know, cards to transact. But UPI was quite a surprise. There've been so much of learning. Like our largest states where we have heavy footprint happen to be Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Orissa. And our best guess was that in terms of percentage of people who would kind of be paying, it would be probably Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Odisha. And as I speak, it's the reverse order. So majority of digital payments are actually coming from Orissa.
Wow, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. So we're like doing a deep dive now to see, you know, what is really working there, and you know, if customers are able to digitally transact in such a difficult period, and once they've done it, I don't see why they would not do it going forward, when situation normalizes. So we're only looking at a up curve going forward.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that, Dara. I mean, it almost feels sometimes that COVID-19 was the right kick in the back that we all needed to kind of get, moving in the right direction. So very, very
Krishna,
good.
I just have one question, if it's okay for Dhara. Yeah.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, Dhara, I just wanted to understand. So you were mentioning your JLG groups. Are they in the tier 2, tier 3 towns or in the rural areas?
So Richa, a majority of them, we are more urban, I would say. So, most of in terms of our branch outreach on microfinance has been urban, peri-urban, semi-rural. But you also know that small finance banks have a 25% mandate of kind of being present in the unbanked rural centers.
Yeah.
So constitution is now shifting. So, we also have customers, who are in sort of deep rural pockets now.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Dara. Sanjay, this is now, an important part of the discussion now. We've got both the finance ladies kind of laying out what they've been able to do, the products, the work at the knowledge level of the finance. But now moving on to the technology infrastructure, and how at the India Stack and everywhere else, the view that you have about digital, and you can probably take the finance lens maybe as well, but maybe even at a broader digital lens itself. Still, the penetration seems very relatively much lesser in rural than in urban. Are we headed in the right direction? Are we headed in that direction as quickly as we should? Will be wonderful to hear. From where you sit, how you are seeing this.
Great. Thanks a lot, Krishna. And it was great to listen to both Richa and Dhara and how they've been looking at helping this consumer base. So the thing about payments in general, right? I mean, there's multiple ways of looking at what we do, and one of the issues that keeps coming up is infrastructure. And I went back and I looked at the TRAI data, and TRAI says that as of December last year, about 28% of people in rural India were using the internet. This is much lower than what you see in urban India, but it has grown by 25% over the previous year, actually over 27%. The year before that was at 22% of users had internet access. So in that sense, we are seeing growth, but even at this pace, it will take, at least 5-6 years before it gets to anywhere comparable to the urban India. Now, that being said, from where I sit, we look at all of these things and say, what is it that we can do with the existing infrastructure? As you know, I've been involved in a whole bunch of things. And so when we did Aadhaar, one of the first things we actually launched was AEPS, the Aadhaar Enabled Payment System, which provided a tech boost to the business correspondent layer, which allowed business correspondents to better serve those users. And it's been the unsung hero of the last, I would say, 6-7 years in terms of enabling people to access their bank accounts. I mean, of course, in the last month, it sort of made front page news, but the fact is that about 33% of money transfers happen over AEPS. I mean, it's a really large number of people who are transacting over AEPS compared to, card, UPI, whatever you name it. There are more people using AEPS than any of those. So from that perspective, it has actually brought in a lot of people into the financial system. And a lot of it has been through assisted points, through BCs, and not actually through self-service mode. So that is one of the first, I would say, pieces of infrastructure that came in was the assisted mode supported by AEPS. Then I've been involved in UPI. And again, when we did UPI, we launched people are not aware of this, but other than the smartphone app, there's also a USSD version of it, where you could actually transact over UPI using USSD, which never took off, right? And we've been consistently trying to understand, and some of it has been because of the inconvenience of using USSD, but also because drop rates, etc., are higher on USSD than anything else. So we've been looking at this problem, and finally we put together a challenge grant for saying, how do we find a new solution that uses UPI over feature phones. And we just actually laid out the challenge grant we published it in November last year, and we selected our first set of participants in Jan, and then of course COVID hit. And we just finished our selection of the candidates, and we announced a winner 2 days ago. And we now have 3 solutions which we think are all going to allow folks to use feature phones and to do digital transactions. So even if they don't have internet connectivity, they should be able to do transactions. Now, of course, it will take time for these solutions to go live, right? I mean, we've only gone through a process of giving a award. I mean, it's a prize, and they haven't gone live yet. So I think it'll take some more time for us to integrate them in, bring them into the ecosystem, and then see how they actually behave on the ground. But I believe that we will try and take more than one of these alive, and then, hopefully the market will react, and with iterations, we'll actually get to a place where even if you don't have internet connectivity, just as long as you have a mobile phone, you should be able to transact. And so that will bring in, I think, the more users into the system. Another related issue, again at CII, we run something called the Bharat Inclusion Initiative, where we focus on a lot of problems that we see around us. And one of the things that we've been discovering is around language. People are not comfortable transacting in English. And the bulk of our financial products and interfaces are all English. And so we are looking to see how we can help improve that. The other is also the use of voice, because people, while they may be comfortable using a smartphone to watch a video, they're not very comfortable using it to do a real transaction, because there is this fear of what happens when something goes wrong. And so we think that is going to be another enabler that we'll need over the next few years to come in to make these, particularly for self-service. For assisted mode, you can still do with the language which your VC understands, but and they will do the translation for the end user. But you need, if you want to be doing it self-service, then you have to be in local languages. And so there's multiple aspects of this problem where tech can play a role and hopefully allow this consumer to come on board. The last piece I want to talk about is demand. I mean, you think of the supply side, can I make changes to product? Can I make changes to infrastructure? Can I make changes to all this? The other thing to think of is, what is it that the user wants to do with finance? What is it that they can do with digital finance that they can't do with just cash? How do you make it so that they are going to ask the pull factor, right? You need to have people saying, I want to get this benefit. I want to be able to do this transaction without having to go far away to do it, whether it is a remittance, whether it is buying farm inputs, or whatever, or dealing with cash when you're selling your farm products, or whatever else they do as part of their day-to-day life, they will value going digital. And then I think that will complete the equation to me. And so, and we're beginning to see that happen. I mean, through Bharat Bill Payment System, we are seeing all of these billers come online, and very soon I think people will find reasons to use digital payments. And I think that will then allow this thing to take off in a way that we haven't seen before.
Wonderful. Sanjay, that's very, very useful. And it's quite encouraging to know now that, at least solutions have been identified, where feature phones could come into play, while obviously the infrastructure on internet will continue to evolve. And I think the demand part is very, it's a very important point, and that's precisely where, I'd like to bring Osama in for the discussion as well. Before I hand over to Osama, just one question that I know a lot of tech people are listening and will be listening to this more from a live stream point of view. What advice or ask do you have from the tech ecosystem, or even in terms of where initiatives like the Digital Sakhi or the work that the Dhara's team is doing or everybody else is doing, how do we kind of bring these two worlds together in terms of the tech and the finance world? And what advice you have from your experience on, are these people speaking different languages? Is there enough collaboration? How do we enable more of that?
So there is some aspect of people speaking different languages in that sense that, particularly when it comes to inclusion, right? If you take a look at all the startups, the first question is, where's the money, right? And That question is always the hard one to answer, because this is a customer from which, if that's the approach with which you go, you won't be able to find the product market fit, right? If on the other hand, the question you ask yourself is, where is it that I can build the scale? Where can I do something at a reasonable cost where I can get to the scale of operations? And then perhaps, that same scale will allow you to make, much less money per transaction per customer, but then because you're actually so much better, you'll even be able to do better in the urban areas, right? Because if a product, so how is it that you set your ambitions a little differently? And I think that's where I would love to see more and more folks sort of try and figure out what this customer needs and how they can service it in a viable manner, right?
Yeah.
And then that's where I think that it would be, you want to bring those players in.
Wonderful. Sanjay, thank you so much. Again, we'll come back with more questions to you now, kind of moving on to the more critical and probably one of the most important discussions around, what does the community need, and, how do we kind of enable adoption, and what is the demand side of the story? What are the learnings, insights from that part of the ecosystem? Osama, if you can please share with us from your experience how you have seen that ecosystem evolve, both in terms of adoption, expectation, aspiration, and also realization of value. I think it will be very useful to hear from that perspective.
Thank you, Krishna, and thank you, Chitra, and Richa, Dhara, and Sanjay. Richa's, your story was very, very fascinating. Also, I would actually take this up separately also to talk to you, to learn from you even more, because it complements a lot of things to the work that we are doing. And also Dhara's and Sanjay said something very useful that we adopt all the time, which is BC's role and Aadhaar's intervention, how it has enabled. Although I am one of the most critic person of Aadhaar itself, but we also use it at a community level. But thanks, Krishna. So I want to go to a base of the discussion when we talk about inclusive digital finance. And all these three terms are actually very challenging to each other. Digital, when we talk about finance, it requires banking infrastructure, financial infrastructure. When we talk about digital and complement each other, it requires digital infrastructure and digital bandwidth and digital penetration, and which Sanjay also highlighted the TRAI's number. And just to complement, as far as the country's situation is concerned, even if, because we are a mobile first country, we are more digital, not because of the whole ecosystem of digital, but more because of phone reach, or the mobile reach. We suddenly become one of the most digital country also, or digitally excluded country as well. We have a maximum of 550 million feature phones, and even if you tell one single feature phone is one single family or a person, it doesn't really reach the number that we are thinking about, and complements the number of TRAIs that says that we haven't reached the 70% of our population with more than 28%, because I'm talking about true. And when COVID came, it was very apparent when you saw all the migrant laborers going from the urban areas to the rural areas, most of them had feature phones. And when we did a survey, and I wrote an article also, that how much they had this problem of, talk time and all that, which was not available to them because they didn't have money, and how desperately they wanted to reach back. But that's the reach part. And when we talk about smartphone, we haven't gone more than 400 to 500 million. And out of that, less than 200 million is in rural India, and most of them, which is in urban India, are multiple, device users, so I may have 2, 3, or somebody else has 4, 5, and so on and so forth. So that's one aspect of things. When we talk about digital financial ecosystem, that's the major big number that we must know. The second part, which COVID has actually exposed, is the depth of digital divide and also the depth of the quality digital divide, qualitative, in the sense that, people like you and me can talk to each other on bandwidth and all that. It may be available to us, but how much it is, important to have 3G, 4G and, good bandwidth to do, transactions and those second. The third part I also wanted to highlight is that, when we talk about financial inclusion, digital financial inclusion, the ecosystem is not only about banking and finance. It's not about withdrawal and all that. Unless the whole cycle of payment and transaction is not enabled, it's not really going to help to increase the number of systems, the number of users, the number of, the inclusion. So that's very, very important. And then only, and that is where we can get into behavioral, because if I have to go and withdraw, and then we have to go to market to make the payment, and then we have to go and, save with somewhere else. So it's too much of pain, and that too, the whole ecosystem has to be less costly than the cost that I was paying, either in terms of time or in terms of transaction cost or in terms of the commission that I might be paying to the transactional, middleman. So these are broad thing that is very, very important, and why it is also important. And thanks to Krishna to bring us all on one platform to discuss, is that at the time of COVID, when we are getting into isolation and we are not going to get rid of COVID for a very, very long time, at least 2-3 years. We are going to live a life where digital infrastructure will be the most important thing that we will be requiring, and therefore the financial digital infrastructure is very, very important. Now, coming to how we have been facing, and just to share some of the stories that you wanted to hear from the rural India and the people and the community, inclusive of the model that Richa works. We have about 10,000, we call it to generalized terms, we call it digital foot soldiers. But they all are, because they are funded by various kind of projects. They are called either Suchnapreneur sometimes, or they are called Community Information Resource Center coordinator, or they are called, digital Didi, or they are called something else or whatever. But we have such 10,000 people in about 25 states and 130 districts across the country. And we are further have community centers, which Richa was talking about, digital Sakhi Kendras that she's planning to start in the future. And we already have about 600 plus such centers across several states and, all in rural, which is actually inclusive of facility of financial, services. So we have approached most of the financial services from the perspective of 3 ways. One is that, can people have their individual smartphone to be enabled to do transaction on their own? Because without smartphone, it becomes, too much of a pain. That's number one. And we must, all of us who are sitting on a seat of responsibility, we also must think of more technological solution from the perspective of a smartphone, rather than a technological solution which is actually going on a feature phone, because in any case, the feature phone is going to go away. So it's better that we think, we talk about getting into powerful smartphone in the hands of the people and enable people, and then build an infrastructure behind that, because they are not only doing financial transaction, but they are also doing hundreds of other things from that device and enabled. So one is, how do we make maximum number of smartphone reach to the people? Number one. Number two, wherever we operate in rural India, if there is no connectivity, we build connectivity. So we will buy a connectivity from, let's say, 10-20 kilometers, wherever it is available, and we use Wi-Fi technology. That is where we use our indigenous technology in terms of bringing from one location to the community, and then we create a Kendra, and we call it Community Information Resource Center, and that's a point of delivery of services. And all these people who are actually the community boys and girls, by the way, the 10,000 people that we have about 70 to 80% girls, and women. So it's, that helps us a lot in what Richa here said, that patriarchal society, you get into home, get into, changing society, changing behavior, empowering women, making the money directly in the hands of the person who should be responsible for money, and all those things. And also, I will add into that one, managing women in this case is much more easier, because we hear a lot of, we get a lot of accountability and responsibility. So the return on investment is much better. We don't have to do too much of monitoring from the perspective of the, corruption, I would say, in the sense that, so they are much more attentive, they are much more accountable, they are much more responsive, they are much more responsible, and so on and so forth. So that helps also. But what I'm actually trying to say is that three things that we have tried to make sure is that, can we make device reach, which is smartphone? The second, can we also take responsibility of bringing high bandwidth connectivity in the area of non-operational or low bandwidth availability, which, both of the other speakers actually highlighted very strongly that, connectivity and the bandwidth are the serious issues. Even though Jio has reached, it has only reached up to the level of, let's say, block level or something. If you go village and panchayat level, you still have to struggle. Earlier we used to struggle up to district level, but now after Jio, what happens is that at least there is some, deeper penetration. The third thing is that, how do we make sure that everyone who work at a village level, whether they are digital Sakhi or Didi or our correspondent or digital foot soldiers, must also get a license of working as a banking correspondent. So the person is not only a financially included person, but also financially included person from servicing the whole area, the village, the panchayat, and everything, so that you deliver financial services at the doorstep. I mean, we never used to deliver at the doorstep, but COVID enabled us. Most of our people had a BC license, so we suddenly felt that the 500 rupees or 2,000 rupees that the PM announced suddenly started reaching in the hands of the people, but because they were not able to leave their houses and go to the bank or something, or they were told to avoid. Our people who also work as banking correspondent actually made it possible to make the money reach to in the hands of the people. So the model that I actually wanted to share is that at a village level, when we talk about these digital Sakhis, or we talk about our digital correspondents, or we talk about banking correspondent, or we talk about community information resource center coordinators, it is very important that we learn from each other and think of how they can become a multifaceted service providers and entrepreneurs. So that, in our case, we use the Kendra for digital health also. We take digital finance also. We talk about digital education also. We talk about digital livelihood also. So we have about 5 pillars that we work on through our Kendra. So, for us, bandwidth is extremely important. It doesn't go into serving one service, but many other services. So it's very important that we also think what, Richa was saying earlier, is that how the digital infrastructure service providers, ISPs, banking infrastructure providers, and all of them come together to actually collaborate and help. That basically the two most important infrastructure is the financial and the digital. On that, everything else can ride, for example, in our case, education didn't stop, because our centers and our people were already enabled and working with the education solution, and most of the people who were connected are still connected. Actually, all the school children who were there where there was no digital now is connected with us to take digital services or digital education. So that was very interesting, learning in the time of isolation. So what I would like to say is that digital financial ecosystem has to be looked at from, very strong collaboration, and also perhaps taking responsibility from, by us, to also see how we can bring connectivity to the areas that we work, by buying the connectivity and bringing locally to the people. I mean, that is also one of the possibilities, considering that BharatNet is saying that, panchayat level connectivity is available. But, when we take project to the panchayat level, are we pressurizing panchayat or the district collector to give us connectivity? Why don't you give us connectivity so that we can use it for our people locally? We become the user, not only from the individual user perspective, but institutional user perspective. So unless we do that, it may be very, very difficult. Because last mile connectivity, the Airtels of the world or the ISPs of the world are not going to look at very, very soon, because there is no ROI for them. I mean, their investment is much higher than the money that they will get. So it may be very interesting that we buy the connectivity from them at a community level and organizational level, and we use it at a community level. And I'm happy to share that how does that happen as what we call as community networks, where you can take the connectivity and use in your area. So if any of you are working in about, let's say, a cluster of 500 villages, you can create your own connectivity, and that is much cheaper than the connectivity that you will be buying from anyone else. It is something like you buy a 50 Mbps for your office where there are 500 users, but that is in one building. So it becomes very easy. But when you take it to a village, of course, it is dispersed. So it may be, a little more challenging to make it, but that can be very, very useful. So those are the points that I wanted to share, but happy to take up any questions.
Thanks so much, Osama. I think the whole concept of community network sounds super exciting, and I think we'll definitely probably hear more from you, and many people may want to know and may reach out to you directly. One question I just wanted to follow up with before we open up to the audience questions is, beyond the connectivity, the access to mobile and stuff, Osama, what has been, according to you, a key aspect of behavioral change and adoption, that you've seen kind of happen? What triggers that? Beyond access and infrastructure, is there more to be done at the community level that will kind of accelerate this process?
So, what Sanjay was earlier talking about, safety and security issue is always there in creating a very good financial ecosystem to reach. And Jamtaras of the world, where Netflix movie is also made, has made it even more difficult to adopt financial inclusion in rural India. But coming to the behavior, I have a very strong story. There is this guy called Irfan in Alwar in one of the villages. He has always 20,000 in his pocket, where he sits with his POS machine, and he's a banking correspondent. This Amma comes, and this is my personal experience, and she just puts her finger and her bank account is open on the screen, which Irfan can see. She's totally exposed, but she trusts that person that he is not going to withdraw more than what she is saying. So and you will never do this in town or in urban areas. And neither Irfan has cheated her, nor she has been cheated. In fact, Irfan gave her 5,000 rupees in her hands, and he actually put the button on 10,000 withdrawal. And I asked him that, why are you doing this? And he said that because Amma had already taken 5,000 yesterday, but yesterday I didn't, put the transaction in her account. I had given from my own pocket.
Wow.
So the trust were, proven from both sides. I mean, she trusted him to get the money when there was no bank account open, and her screen was not open without biometric. When she came with biometric, everything is exposed. He did it and gave lesser money. And so now, she also trusts him that it's not more than the money that was supposed to be withdrawn. So what I'm basically trying to say is that financial transaction needs to be extremely important to create trust. Unfortunately, that requires digital trust, or digital infrastructure trust, But at a local level, this banking correspondent thing is not going to go away very long, because the person is identified as a local person, There is a whole community dependence on that person and identification, The person will become a pariah if he is going to do something wrong, So, and when you get mobile smartphone mobile in each and every hand, when the person will not need a person like Irfan or any banking correspondent, then I think it is very, very important that digital infrastructure is prepared with digital trust. But till then, it is very important that this trust is not gone away, and this builds and this behavioral build is built upon this transaction facility available with the local infrastructure, which is built with a human plus digital plus financial.
I just want to add in here, Krishna. So the very interesting point Osama mentioned, with this trust factor. Actually, that's the very reason which led to the birth of Digital Sakhi, because she is a lady who's from that village only, and people are already knowing her. So if you have somebody, so let's say if L&T Financial Services was to do it, people will not, obviously there will be a lot of apprehensions. Even our implementing partners, if they do it, there will be some sort of a, apprehensions. Who are these coming? They are outsiders and doing it. But if it's a peer-to-peer learning program, which the Digital Sakhi is, she's a lady whom you are already knowing, great communication skills. She's been meeting you over the meals or something. She's been sometimes been even Anganwadi Karyakarta also. So, people know her already. Now, if you impart her with technology, with the knowledge, with all the assets, she's empowered and people already trust her. And therefore, in order to assimilate the knowledge that she's imparting and also to ensure adoption, which is happening at a digital level, there is a greater buy-in. And therefore, we've seen both in Maharashtra, MP, and in Tamil Nadu, there's an increased adoption on digital modes of payment and various, other financial literacy sessions also that she's been undertaking. So I just want to bring in that fact that, a lady of, the same area, when she's chosen, the trust deficit is almost not there.
Fantastic. This is very, very useful, and I think kind of also connects with some of the questions I'm getting from the audiences. So
and Krishna, one thing I also wanted to add, one thing is that all these 10,000 people that we have, digital foot soldiers, are not paid by us.
Yeah.
They use all the assets that has been given to them as an opportunity to become an entrepreneur. So they all are digital entrepreneurs. So that is also sustainable. And that is, by the way, that is from day one. We don't give a stipend even for the first 5 months or 6 months or 3 months or 1 month. No.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So just from the audience, there's lots of questions coming in. It's great to see so many different models, that are already being played on the ground. Some very specific questions kind of coming. So I'll just redirect that to you all, and then we'll come back to more, kind of closing questions from my end. One of the questions, since we are in the trust factor, I'll probably pick that not in the order that's come, but more in terms of the discussion we are having right now. And maybe Dhara, this is something very relevant from your perspective, given that a lot of collections that you do is being cash. Is there a risk of, how do you secure the cash when it travels like that, on the ground, especially coming from the microfinance space? Do you see leakages, within that system, and hence is digital an opportunity to stop that leakages? Has that been a problem of, between your correspondence to other parts of your chain of where the cash moves? Is there a risk of that, and how has that been managed? And is digital a good way to kind of now move in that direction?
Yeah, so when it comes to cash, there are two aspects. One is, this keeps on coming in the news quite often, that the loan officer is traveling with cash and, he's attacked, and, there are these attempts to sort of take away the cash. On those kind of things, obviously as an institution, we need to sort of adequately kind of have insurance cover, protect ourselves. Another thing is also, the frauds which are possible. The loan officer on an average carries about 1.5 lakh to 2 lakhs of cash. There are chances that, he may kind of, want to take that, and there is possibility of a fraud. So what we kind of, have now sort of started doing as a process is that, whenever there is a center meeting, we already know what is the lat long for that center. So, and we know the time that that center meeting is scheduled. And we monitor on an ongoing basis whether, the payment has come and the entry really has been posted from that lat long. So we know that the person has picked up the cash. The vulnerability is the time that he's picked up the cash and actually brought it to the branch. So, these are a couple of ways in, which we're trying to sort of mitigate, this risk around cash.
Got it. Got it. Sanjay, there's also a question around cyber fraud. I mean, is that an issue when it comes to the digital payment space, especially? You touched upon security as a key aspect, and some also talked about it, but more concrete step to kind of manage any fraudulent activities in this space, and how is security? What is the level of security today, and how is it growing?
So in terms of cyber fraud, I think, Osama already mentioned Jamtara is a great example of, how frauds do happen. So what we have seen is really, 2 or 3 different types of fraud. Most of them actually involve getting the user to reveal an OTP or, enter a PIN when it's not required. So it's kind of all human engineering, right? And that's really the hardest to prevent other than through customer education. Because, I sent a OTP to a user, the user gave it to somebody else. Really, from the service provider's perspective, it's very hard to detect that something's going wrong. But every payment provider I know actually does have as much fraud detection technology as they possibly can. But anytime when you work through social engineering and convince the user to do something, foolish, silly, whatever, and they get cheated, that's the hardest one you can protect. But that being said, I think RBI published statistics about a year ago in terms of losses due to fraud. And the bulk of them were actually on the loan side of it. Payment fraud as such, as a category, while we talk about it, and there's this RBI Kehta Hai series and all of that to get customer education, in terms of percentages, have not risen up to extremely serious risk. But it's good that people are aware of it. So actually, I'm happy that people are talking about it more than it's actually happening, because that's the right way by which you can actually prevent it from happening. Yeah. So. Yeah.
No, interesting. I think that's an interesting thought.
And I just want to add, Sanjay, even NPCI has been, who's been working, and there are partners. They've been also promoting this a lot. What are the do's and don'ts? And through our Digital Sakhi Krishna, the SOPs that we have developed along with Satva, we've included all the do's and don'ts that Sanjay is talking about. It is important to keep educating customer communities and all. Because, at the rural areas, it's all the more people, trust their relatives and all, and they tend to give their PIN number and everything. It's very critical for a Digital Sakhi to ensure that, what are the do's and don'ts, and not to give them to even your close relatives because of the fraudulent transaction that can take place. So there are, again, I'm talking about trust, I'm going back to that. It can be only mitigated if you are able to address it through an agent who's reliable and known to you, also is regularly sharing information which is being shared by expert agencies. So I agree with Sanjay that continuously knowledge sessions have to happen.
Actually, maybe I should add one more point to this. One of the things that we have seen missing in our ecosystem is good grievance redressal, right? Because, and this is systemic, right? You don't have good systems in place, so you don't have good grievance redressal, and which is why people, when something goes wrong, don't even complain, because they're just sort of write it off. And that needs something where more education, this direct connect through agents might be great, because if at least they can follow up and get the grievance to the right authorities and get it redressed, I think, might improve our systems as well. And that's something which is very, very important.
Completely agree, sir. Completely agree. I think that's a very, very interesting point. And even as open users, that's helped us, in quite a few occasions, right? So to just go back to the system. There's a more specific question, Richa and Osama, from your perspective, your Sakhis or your teams on the ground who are these individual entrepreneurs in the community, do they need to be certified? Is there like IIBF or any other certification required to control that, ecosystem or guide that ecosystem in some sense?
So Richa, go ahead.
Yeah, so, Krishna, first 3 years, we've not, we don't have any certification process, but we are in talks with NPCI because they've started online training. And this year, like, as you know, it will be very difficult for us to get a group of people and conduct training sessions. as part of Digital Sakhi program, we have to keep doing foundational training for the new geographies that we go on and refresh the training to Digital Sakhis and leadership training. There are certain training programs which are part of Digital Sakhi program. Now, to do these online trainings that we're doing with NPCI, we're looking at a certification program jointly by them as well as L&T Financial Services. It is still in discussion.
Got it. Got it.
Okay, so as far as the education is concerned, literacy is concerned, knowledge is concerned, of course, there are various kind of certification programs from whoever maybe sponsors or whoever supports and so on and so forth. For example, we do one with CII, so we also got involved with financial digital literacy. So that was then, we were also part of the National Digital Literacy Mission, which was created for the Ministry of IT. By DEF and NASSCOM was also certification process, but that is one part. The second part is that when you become BC, that has its own route of certification. You cannot become a BC without being properly getting associated with a designated bank. So that is a certification itself. You cannot operate without that one, and therefore that's a very safe one, that you are not only being recognized by a bank or certified by a bank, and therefore you are legally liable, but you are also recognized by your community that you have authority to do that. So these are two things that we have to look at. But when you talk about purely working as digital financial foot soldier or banking correspondent, of course there could be like Richa said, that there are do's and don'ts, then there are the proper certification programs and things like that. But I believe that most of the banking correspondent guys that we have, or the girls that we have, they haven't gone through particularly any deep, these kind of programs. They are mostly self-made or trained by us, with very, whatever is available. And these kind of even non-certification program is available in dime a dozen and in many languages actually. But if you look at the mobile enablement of most of the financial digital transaction kind of apps or other things, they are quite interesting to be self-learning tool in any case, And one thing I wanted to highlight, to take this opportunity with, I forgot when Sanjay was talking about language. There is this company, a startup in Bangalore, which has actually enabled local language. They call it Genie. So Genie is a software or an application that writes on the application, and it literally guides you, click this, click that, then move hand this, then write, and then it talks to the person who is handling the app to do any financial transaction on your own without knowing a local language can happen that one. So it is happening that way also.
Fantastic. So the next question, Dharam, this could be something that, it'll be great to get your view, and then Richard or someone can add as well. If there are first-time entrepreneurs, if they're already financially included, in the ecosystem, digital, how do you, the first-time financial inclusion, especially of the entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, is that a difficult kind of a process? How do we kind of enable or speed up process of getting, especially the entrepreneur ecosystem, the self-employed ecosystem, faster onto the financial and digital bandwagon?
Yes, so we've been experimenting with this, and I don't know whether we've kind of arrived at a perfect solution. So one is, we do have first-time borrowers even in our regular JNG business. But the other segment that, we've kind of been working with are very, very small entrepreneurs. And we typically lend in range of 50,000 to 1 lakh. So, really small roadside shops, vegetable vendors. And when we onboard these customers, they don't have bureau records. So a lot of underwriting is visual. A lot of underwriting involves, their references in and around how long they've been kind of doing that business. We do talk to their family. So the entire process that kind of really goes to figure out in terms of what is that loan that you can actually give to this person, is very, very elaborate. And, we kind of mitigate the risk by, having two people do it. So the loan officer who's working in that geography does it. Our hypothesis, is quite similar to our JLG, where we find that, if this person is not going to see the loan officer, probably the repayment will not come. The very first, when we experimented, we did find early mortalities and defaults. Then after, we actually changed our model, to a pin-based strategy. So where we find that cluster of, small entrepreneurs, we drop a pin, and, we are servicing that area 2 to 3 kilometers. And what that creates is, one, the loan officer is in that geography, so every second, third day, he's passing by, he says a hi, hello, how you're doing. And when we started this, we actually found that, the sort of the defaults really, really dropped. Now, from a cost of operations, it's an expensive model. So, we will really have to look at, one, getting them started on smaller amounts. So, the first set of underwriting or loans that you do it for a shorter period, smaller amount. If they display good repayment behavior, then you graduate them to a, higher amount. And especially when it comes to entrepreneurs, we do also undertake, trainings, making sure that they have, they open their current accounts, they have transactions, because the idea is also to, over a period of time, graduate to surrogate programs which are built on their ITRs or, GST. It's difficult. I mean, the initial, I think it took us a lot of time to really, crack underwriting on this segment. But I think these have been, some of the learnings, and it's just shaping up well now.
Krishna, may I step in?
Wonderful. Please, Sanjay.
Yeah. So one of the things that, we've been doing, I'm going to pitch a program which are not directly associated with, which I like a lot, which is this Global Alliance for Micro-Entrepreneurship, GAME, which I think they're running some sessions tomorrow as well in the Charcha 2020. But the whole idea is that micro-entrepreneurship needs to be supported in many different ways, and they need different kinds of support. One is finance, one is training, and so on. And they're looking at multiple aspects of that. One of the work that we are doing as part of our Bharat Inclusion Initiative is around, we believe that for a lot of folks who are early stage entrepreneurs, you don't need debt. Credit is in fact probably not the best form of giving them support, because they need capital. They don't necessarily need credit. And maybe there is a way like equity kind of capital, which can be created in a way that has its own issues. So we know, because think about somebody starting a business for the first time, there's a very high risk of failure. And that failure, if is a loan that becomes part of a black mark on the credit record, and they'll even if the money is lost for the bank, for that person, their future is also going to be a little difficult to manage. So from that perspective, they need that training support to help them, but at the same time, perhaps the kind of capital they get should more be in the form of equity of some kind and not necessarily a loan. And there's no structure available today for that. And so we are looking at, we have started a research fellow to start to explore the space and try and figure out how we can come up with a new instrument that might actually work better for this case than the currently available instruments. So I hope something comes out of it. I don't know what will, but I know the need is there, and I'm optimistic that if we bang our heads hard enough, we'll find something.
No, absolutely, Sanjay. The solution is already there. In fact, interestingly, Yunus and team have been kind of experimenting this in Bangladesh over the last few years, where they started doing micro equity for their existing members, fairly successful. And with their team, we were about to launch it in India just before COVID, and we've kind of now held back on that given the COVID-19. But we had started to look at the architecture of that, in India. So it's interesting that the micro equity model is becoming more of a conversation,
So we've been working with
which
Vijay
I think
Mahajan on
is a
this.
very good
Yeah, Vijay Mahajan is, I guess,
correct.
associated.
Yeah.
So we've been working with Vijay on trying to get that sorted. But we are thinking of it more as an experiment than a launch right now. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. I think it's very, very interesting to hear that. We're running kind of out of time, though there are more questions coming up in the chat window, but we have to give some space for I think the last question we've answered a little bit on, what all were the challenges to a large extent. We've laid that out. Maybe we can just, Osama, for a minute, take just a minute or two on the question on agriculture, in specifically DFI in the space of agriculture, any learnings, inputs that either you or Richa have will be good to hear. And then we can move on to kind of a wrap up between all of us.
Yeah, sure. In the post-COVID era and in continuing space, what we are looking essentially from a women entrepreneurs is that, because women entrepreneurs in our program are typically really nano ones, they are self-employed category. Now, in order to look at, them, so that their credit taking ability can increase, we have to continuously do hand-holding. We have to ensure that, we regularly are upskilled on the trades. They are given regular inputs through our support, whatever little bit we can give. And therefore they are overall able to expand their business. In order to get the demand going, consumption going, it is important that there is cash in their account. As of now, these women, and I'm sure someone knows about it, basically they are, rural women who don't have asset itself. They don't have money in their account. So in order to do that, it is important that first we help them build their assets through giving them some input support, and also look at training programs so they can scale up their business. So that's something which we'll continue to do, and we'll have greater focus. We will also look at greater focus from an entitlement point of view. Again, from Digital Sakhi, we will have to ensure that community has money into their account. Whatever schemes have been promoted by the government, in order to ensure any financial literacy or digital financial literacy has to happen only when money is there in the account. That's a basic question they'll ask us when we go to the field. और when Digital Sakhi goes to the field, कि पैसा तो है नहीं, आप financial literacy की बात करें तो पैसा आने का, वो कैसे आएगा पैसा? First, when Digital Sakhi is able to ensure this is what is the scheme and this is how you need to avail benefit. So that's going to be our focus in coming one and a half years or so. Coming to the question, Krishna, which is on the merchant piece, which I just saw in the chat piece. So, what we've been doing in our Digital Sakhi, specifically Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra, where adoption has been higher on digital modes, is also parallelly training our merchants, these are these small, kirana shopkeepers. So we've been promoting, the use of QR code, which is very easy through Digital Sakhis. And in some places we've given POS machines. In the UPI has been one of the very popular methods within Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra and some parts of MP also. So active use of that. And also the schemes that the governments, they came up with, with the MDR on 2,000 rupees, which is basically helping merchants, so that they can also look at greater transaction on digital modes of payment. That's something also which we are looking at parallelly, so that both merchants are good with taking different modes of payment, as well as community feels that this particular merchant who's there is actually ensuring that whatever we are buying, we are able to use these modes of payment. So merchant training is also critical in order to ensure adoption.
Fantastic. Richa, thanks. Osama, anything you'd like to add?
I would more like to add from the conceptual perspective is that especially the learning I see that when you go to the Kirana level or the local shop level and all that, I would like to bring in our original discussion on the ecosystem. Unless, those Kirana shops or anybody who is going there or they are transacting, unless their ecosystem is not enabled to make the payment or transaction, ultimately, then again, I'm going to a bank, withdrawing the money and then going to pay to the local is a huge cumbersome process. And therefore, digital and financial infrastructure there is very, very important. I should be comfortable with my apps. It should be available in my mobile. I should have a mobile which should have all this and with trust. And all of them should be able to take those payments. That's important. And that's the reason why it's not happening. And now maybe because of the COVID, we may be pressurized to do it because we have to do it because we, there is no other option, maybe because going to the bank is risky, bringing money and then making payment is risky, and so on and so forth. And therefore, again, we need this. Maybe this will happen faster. The second thing, what I also feel is that localization, and when I say localization, is not total localization, at least regional localization of digital financial infrastructure is very, very important, because we are not going to buy things anymore which is coming from abroad or coming from different states or whatever, because it's too much of a supply chain and too much of a transactional involvement required. So there might be a incremental value of localization, the local area, district level, state level, block level, where you do the transaction locally, you procure locally, you supply locally, and things like that. So that will actually create its own ecosystem of trust and all that. But that's my theory, that because of COVID, that may increase, and their digital will become very, very important. It's something like internet will become WAN and LAN, and it has to work in that manner from all ecosystem perspective, because you are, because you can see already, because of this isolation, because of this blockage, because of so many things, the global and national supply chain will be hampered, and therefore the dependency on local will increase. And that is what my take on that. And as far as the agriculture is concerned, we have to, agriculture, interestingly, is very, very strongly, very, very localized potentially, because, everybody needs agriculture products, everybody needs food, everybody needs vegetables and everything. Can the digital enable them local supply chain? Local enabled supply chain, that will be very interesting. And there the knowledge of availability, knowledge of supply, knowledge of demand will be very interesting to actually create an ecosystem of supply, so that I don't get my vegetables supplied anymore from Mathura or from Haryana or from somewhere else, or for that matter, Mathura finds its own buyers in their area, what they call as the natural ecosystem of 100-mile economy, where everything floats, so the cost will also be less, the supply will be much more robust, and so on and so forth. Thanks.
No, absolutely. So that's, I think that's a great, point to kind of bring this to a closure. I mean, we've kind of been at it for 2 hours. We could have gone on for longer, I feel. But given the interest of time, we also have a quick poll to do. This has been very, very interesting to hear from all your perspectives. One last request from you all is that if while our end goal is to make sure that every household is digitally included and financially included. If you had a magic wand to wave, what would you do to kind of enable that every single household is digitally and financially included? And anybody can start.
I would say give a smartphone as a national policy in every household. Not everyone, every household.
Every household, one smartphone, along with your Aadhaar card.
That comes without saying, I guess.
you get the Aadhaar, you get a phone sent you. Wonderful. Okay. Dhara, Sanjay, Richa.
I think that's the infrastructure enablement. But what I would actually want to do is also on the other side, make sure that everybody who's providing goods and services is also willing to accept payments digitally. So I think the acceptance ecosystem side is where I think I would want to enable that, because I think the pull is, we've come to a point where I think pull is more important. And that's what I would want to create.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would actually second, Sanjay on that. Whereas, we talk about cash and, wanting aspirationally to actually, look at customers funding their accounts and the EMIs going out of their accounts. But, that's not going to happen unless everybody, starts going digital. So, a customer who's working on a piecemeal basis, she has to receive a payments, digitally to her account. Somebody who's working as a house help would need to receive, money digitally. So, there has to be a push factor, across in the entire ecosystem. And when that happens, I think, we have a way, to look forward to.
Yeah, so I think, Krishna, I feel that both push and pull has to be there. Push, of course, government has been promoting use of digital finance with COVID being there. There has to be touch-free collections. You cannot have cash. We know that virus survives on cash as such. So, so obviously push has to be there. But people also need to have income. The rural areas, we're talking about demand generation, but how will people do transactions? The money is not there. It is important for us as the CSRs to ensure that, through our programs, the income, the DBT, which the government is talking about from the entitlement scheme, is happening there. People are knowing about it. People are able to avail the benefit of it, and it's there in their accounts so that they can do transactions digitally. So these are two things. Both push and pull has to be there.
No, absolutely, and really wonderful to kind of hear that at least we are headed in the right direction. I think that's kind of what I summarize from this entire discussion. There's already a lot of stuff happening. I mean, from hearing from all of you all, it seems like the ecosystem is so active, and so much of already we've kind of moved in this direction. Many successful models which are working in their micro units very well. I think the need now to accelerate and blowing that up is really where we could all come together potentially, and we at SAFA are very committed to that. So we will be in touch with you all on how, or if there are areas we could what we discussed take forward, and how soon that can be done. But really appreciate all of you for your time spent today. It's wonderful to hear from each one of you, and thanks for bringing in such diverse set of viewpoints. And I think we've pretty much covered. We couldn't have asked for better depth and breadth of a discussion on this particular topic. So kudos to all of you for that. I request you all to also stay for the poll, participate in the poll, and then maybe hopefully we'll see some interesting input from the poll as well. I'll just hand over to Saloni now to run the poll and come back to us with results as well. But thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krishna, and thank you, everyone. I would request the panelists and the audience to log in to www.menti.com with the code 10281. We'll now shift to the poll and show the live results. The first question is, what type of organization do you represent? We will share the results of this with everyone post the session. Moving to the second question. If you could rate on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, how ready is India for inclusive digital finance? Moving on to the next question. If you could rank the strategies in order of priority: linkages to financial aspirations, knowledge transfer to drive adoption, infrastructure support, democratizing access, and product process innovations. Moving on to the next question. If you could rank the product focus in order of priority: cash transfer/payments, loans or financing instruments, insurance, and investment solutions. Thank you so much. We will be sharing the results and the key takeaways from the session soon. I'm sorry, there's one more question. Which of these innovations is necessary for inclusive digital finance? Home delivery of financial solutions, supercharging existing institutions as hubs for easy access, digital connection to trusted financial counselors, and digital access to financial health recovery solutions. And thank you so much, everyone. We will be sharing the results soon and the key takeaways from the session. Again, a big thank you to all the panelists and our moderator, Krishna, for the session. The session gave us a lot of insights, and I'm sure it has given us a lot of deep thoughts into how we can now make digital inclusive finance a reality and a practical reality for everyone. So thank you, everyone. A big thank you to the audience as well. And we close the session.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.